This is TWiT.
Shawn Thorsson's here. I'm really excited to have Shawn on. Shawn, you may remember this. He wrote this book last year from Make Magazine, Props and Costume Armor. Shawn is at Thorsson Associates Workshop, which is just up the road a piece. Great to see you, Shawn. Thank you for joining us today and for bringing your great, I don't want to call them cosplayers. These are amazing costumes.
I make cosplay. This is several levels above.
Look at this. There's a Schick Hydro razor. And by the way, if you watch carefully, his lubricating strips light up.
That's right.
Pretty nice. Did you do that on commission from Schick?
I did, yeah. It was created as part of their marketing campaign last year, and they decided they wanted to have it walking around at different events to be able to actually meet people and hand out swag, that sort of thing. And of course, you can't bring pixels to Comic Cons, so the actual character itself, I was able to take all the bits and bytes and digital models that they used for the animation and then bring it into the real world using CNC carving, 3D printing, and then of course all those parts are fairly fragile, so they had to be molded and made into fiberglass and other composites and metal parts in order to make it more durable.
You did not study this in school?
No, of course
not.
You
just figured this all out?
Right.
So tell me, so you were in the Navy. What did you do in the Navy?
Well, I'm still 1 week in a month in the Navy. I'm a surface warfare officer, so while I was still on active duty, I was a division officer on a destroyer running a group of sailors in a particular,
So you were in a CNC environment? And,
yeah, my first job actually was responsible for the guys in the Combat Information Center.
Wow.
So the operations specialist. So if you remember the opening scene in Top Gun with all the blue lights and the radar screens, that room on the destroyer was mine.
Wow.
And then after that, I went into the engineering plant on my second ship, and then I was an instructor at a schoolhouse in Rhode Island for a couple of years for the Navy, and then left active duty and transitioned to the Merchant Marine.
Oh, neat. So do you ship out still?
No, I don't. I did that for a handful of years, and what would happen is I'd go out to sea for months at a time, and I'd get back, and I'd suddenly be flush with cash and have nothing but free time.
Kind of like a movie star.
Oh, it was hilarious.
Yeah, in between movies.
I started doing really frivolous things. 1 year I chromed my car.
That's different.
The whole thing?
That's definitely different.
Just the outside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just the outside.
But I mean, I had a lot of fun with it. It was basically just like, all right, well, it's been blue for like 10 years. Now it'll be really shiny. So yeah, I got to learn a little bit about auto body materials and that sort of thing.
And the finickiness of chrome.
Oh my goodness,
chrome's tough to work with.
I can't tell you how much I hate chrome lately.
But you look at this chrome helmet. This is pretty cool,
I'm very proud of it.
Super easy, right? And you don't have to do any prep. You just drop it in the vat.
You pretty much just pull the thing out of the mold and rub some snot on it, and it's good to go. No, this thing actually, every time I find myself doing something with a polished metal finish, it always ends up being, prep it, clear coat it, double check, go back and repaint it.
Because there's always little imperfections.
Chrome shows off every little imperfection.
And if it's not already perfectly shiny, almost chrome, before you chrome it, then after you do, it's going to show up every flaw. So yeah, this is round 4 on this paint job, and I'm still seeing things I don't like about it. So I'll go back and redo it at some point in the shop this year.
So this, you taught yourself, I mean, are there resources to learn this
There
stuff?
are. Again, like I say, every year I'd come back, I'd have all kinds of extra cash to throw away. But I also started sometime typically in May or June to get ready for Halloween.
The old Halloween thing.
So at the time, what would happen more often than not is I'd sit down and I'd start looking at, okay, well, here's this character that I really like from this video game or this movie or whatever else. And I'd start looking to see if, A, does anybody sell this thing? Because it'll be a lot easier in every way if I can just have
get a model, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, like if there's a
buy the kit.
Purchasable costume out there.
What was your first costume?
Well, I mean, when I was a kid, who knows? But the first thing that was on this kind of level, I just left Japan. I was forward deployed for a couple of years. And when I moved back to the States, I was really excited about having my first real Halloween. And the idea at the time was I wanted to be a stormtrooper from Star Wars.
Who doesn't?
Right. Yeah. So the deal is, back then, you could find garage makers that were building kits on their own and that sort of thing. The problem is, of course, I'm a little short for a stormtrooper. All these were rigged for, designed for someone who's 6 foot or thereabouts. So I was going to spend, some 4-figure number of dollars to buy a kit that I'd have to hack and slash and mod and turn into something that would fit me. So instead, I started poking around on the internet, which, I mean, was less useful at the time. But I found this really amazing website called studiocreations.com. And those guys had all these amazing step-by-step tutorials for everything you could want to know for how to make Star Wars costumes. So, how to build a vacuum forming machine, how to sculpt, how to mold, all these things, very useful. And that was sort of the beginning of finding my way into things like the Replica Prop Forum, a bunch of other forums that are out there for people to discuss building and shaping.
Actually, it's funny because Star Wars is very active. There's the 509th. There's all these 501st, the squadron. So there are a lot of people making Stormtrooper.
There are.
Oddly enough, Stormtrooper costumes.
So the deal for me was after the first year, when I did that costume, I ended up in a different state each year after that for the next 3 years.
Here's where we sent a camera out. This is your studio where and Jerry's trying on
now, I have to ask about this because, I mean, I understand doing something like a pilot's outfit because that had to be an actual costume piece for Star Wars. But when you take something like the Hydro model or even Iron Man where it was mostly CG, how do you actually turn it into a costume? Because joints aren't where they're supposed to be. And
it's made up.
Yeah. There's always some challenge trying to figure out the rigging. If you've got something like some of the costumes that I've done work out to be ridiculously bigger.
You're good with that hammer. That's good.
That's the rest of this costume. So yeah, a lot of the times it's a question of figuring out where you can put joints so that you can maintain mobility.
Right.
For something that's essentially person-shaped, it's not that hard to do. But once you start getting into things that are bigger and weirder, you have to start finding ways to make it so that, okay, if I can cheat and put the shoulders in a little bit the wrong place, keep the hip joints where the character's hip joints are, and then you can kind of get away with, adjusting where your knees are going to be in relation to the character's knees. You can use...
Well, like on the Iron Man
Gnomes,
costume, which is fantastic. I love that piece. I can tell the shoulders are actually down below. But to maintain the view.
So when they did this character for the film, the first one was actually done practical to some extent, the first film.
Okay.
And so when they did it, what you don't realize is they actually made the thing, they give it these hero proportions. So instead of normal, person proportions, it's actually more like, 7 or more heads tall. And in order to do that, they've actually built in significant platform heels. And that's why if you really go back and look at some of the earlier versions of Iron Man in the first 2 movies, he's got kind of a bell-bottom flare to the bottom of the legs. So the wearer's ankles are actually a good 6 inches up off the ground. And it gives the character that much more height as far as making the
I have no respect for Robert Downey Jr.
That could not have been easy to move around.
No, this one's definitely, a little on the uncomfortable side. But then, in order to make that still look sort of human and not just ridiculous weird arms.
That. Oh my God, that's awesome!
Oh my goodness.
What you end up with also is they build up the shoulders a little bit, and of course in order to have a person's head inside the helmet has to be bigger than a person's head. So in order for the character to maintain sort of human proportions, you still have, bigger head means bigger shoulders, means bigger chest, means, whatever. And of course, tiny little waist.
We have a tiny little TIE fighter pilot over here. That is beautiful too. I really like that.
In a bit of a rush to find someone to wear it this morning.
She's a little smaller than the normal size TIE fighter.
Yeah,
but you got to get in that plane. That plane is not that cockpit.
No, it's
small.
There's a lot of space in there.
Yeah, you got to be Tom Cruise size to get in that thing.
Yeah, this one's actually intended for my girlfriend, who's a good 6 or 7 inches taller than my model here today. So she's a little stunted, but it works.
She doesn't look stunted. Hey, let's give them credit because they've been standing around in these hot, uncomfortable objects for a long time. Do you know your names of your various models here?
So I have Charlotte in a black TIE pilot.
Hi, Charlotte. She's a Sea Scout.
Yep. Here in Petaluma. Same with Agatha, her sister, in the Iron Man costume.
That's a woman in the Iron Man costume?
It is,
nice job, Agatha.
Then,
you fooled
my
me.
shop assistant, Freddie's, wearing the Hydrobot today.
He looks like a giant razor.
It works.
You guys are great. Thank you for being very patient. You can go to the bathroom now.
It's true.
They really
They've
look
been
great.
locked in those.
So you can do this. You do this for fun, but now it's become a business for you.
Yeah, it's really a hobby that's just completely gotten out of control. It started off like
nice
I say.
You can support it though, right?
What was happening was every year I'd go out, get excited about Halloween, start building a thing, and then the next thing you know, after a few years of pictures getting around and people sharing things all over online, it got to the point where people started asking me to build things for them instead.
You made this for who does it Take Two?
2K. Yeah,
2K. That's
2K
right.
games. So this is actually the harpoon gun that's carried by one of the characters in their game Evolve. So the deal was they had this giant monster statue that they were taking around to all their different events, so they could kind of promote the game.
Right.
And they were having a problem where people would walk by and kind of glance at it and not really do much else. Like, hey, wow, that's really cool.
Nice model.
Maybe stare at it for a while, but then that was as much traction as it was really getting. So they decided to go ahead and set it up with all the different weapons from the game so that people could actually stand and pose for pictures, hunting the giant monster. So I did 4 different weapons. There was this harpoon gun.
By the way, I'm glad you chose the 100K charging unit, because that charging cell is so much better than
way.
yeah. 50K.
Well, actually, it was a lot of fun because they gave me the digital assets that are used to render the thing in-game.
Okay.
And then all the skins, so I could get really good up-close, detailed pictures to look at for all the warning labels and things like that.
And you know what you do, Shawn, that's so good? The distress.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
It really
I can't
looks
ever do that.
like it's been used. And in movies, that makes a big difference.
Step one, it really helps to have a really filthy workshop.
So some of this filth is real.
natural.
Yeah, no, most of it's just on account of it's been sitting still for too long. It's why in my case, it's I tend to prefer things that are distressed and used and thoroughly beaten up, so that if there is a little scratch in the paint somewhere or a little bit of dust that gets in there,
you don't
somewhere,
say, "Oh, there's something wrong with it." So this is you make molds. These tell us how you're doing this.
So
this is
right
fiberglass.
Here, I'm actually demolding a urethane resin copy of the same goddess Thor helmet that's sitting here on the table. So what'll happen in this case is I've made a silicone rubber jacket over the original digital sculpt that was CNC carved. And then once that's done, it's just a question of taking that silicone mold, coating the inside with resin, and then once it cures, you've got a shell that you can use to actually wear. Need some trimming and cleanup and that sort of thing.
You also work in fiberglass.
I'm doing a lot more fiberglass than I would really like.
Do you do any vacuum forming?
A little bit, yeah, here and there. It's usually the way it works out is it's a budget concern. So my
fiberglass
parts,
is cheaper and easier. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no. The vac form parts are cheaper and easier. The fiberglass parts will last a lot longer. So if you've got, a fiberglass piece that gets painted proper and treated like you care about it, it's built like a boat.
Right.
Whereas if you've got a vac form thing that's built like the lid on your, cafe coffee cup,
right.
You're going to have an easy time finding things that'll tear or break or split or anything like that.
We actually went. We were lucky enough to get to go to your hyper secret location. And do a little a tour of it, and I thought we could just roll that in right here. This is Thorsson Associates Workshop.
So right now it's kind of tough to see most of what's going on just because I'm buried under the last couple of months worth of work. So what I have in this corner is where I tend to do all of the molding and casting type stuff. So you can see this huge stack of pink rubber molds for making things out of urethane resin. All these molds are silicone, and this is where I'm making little pieces that get added on to some of the bigger pieces. Moving further down this way, on this corner is usually where I make all of my molds. Again, we're in the middle of about 7 or 8 different projects in the room right now, so of course everything's piled with pieces and parts from other projects. So it's kind of a disaster, but usually this is where all of the splatter happens, where all those pink molds are being made. Once pieces actually come out of the molds, usually I take them to the back bench here, where all of the cast parts actually go through and get cleaned up. So this is where all the sanding and trimming and cutting ends up happening. So usually there's a lot of dust in this corner. But currently I'm in the middle of making a whole bunch of pieces, which is why you've got all these little orange fiberglass bits all over the place, which we're coating with a mold release so that we can make parts out of them. Moving a little further, I've got a pair of 3D printers here, both of which pretty much tend to run 24/7. So these are my Zortrax M200s. It's just a regular filament deposition modeling 3D printer. Nothing unusual about them in any way. But like I say, ever since I got these machines, I try to keep them going on something all the time. So there's a huge backlog of models that I've got sort of stored so that I can get around to it. And I don't want to have to sit and wait for something to print when I finally have time to mess with them. Keep these boxes on top so that they've always got kind of a constant temperature inside, and it keeps the dust out of the machinery. In this ridiculously cluttered little room, this is where my CNC machines live. I've actually got 4 of these Carve-Right CNC machines. They're made for woodworking, but most of the time when I'm doing the projects that I'm doing, I use these to carve out pieces to make, helmets and armor parts and, weapon replicas and that sort of thing. And then the current work in progress, this corner is where I'm building my paint booth. Right now it's just where I'm stacking up all of the things that are waiting to be painted. So there's a lot of dust while I'm getting around to that mess. And then of course on the side there's always the collection of combat garden gnomes in progress. I was working on a merchant ship. I was a navigator on a container ship and had a little bit of free time to kill and decided it'd be really funny to make garden gnomes when I got home. Since I have all these materials and tools and skills and everything else, I wanted to come up with something that would sort of pay for itself and possibly make some money. So yeah, I came up with a handful of different ideas for, silly things to do with garden gnomes that nobody had done before. And out of the, a dozen or so different things that I'd sort of, brainstormed overnight, the only one that I wasn't able to find somebody already doing was a mashup between little green plastic army men and garden gnomes. So at this point, I've sculpted out 13 different poses. They've all been molded and cast, and every time I've got a couple of slow minutes in the shop, I'll go ahead and cast another one. And then when I've got 15 or 20 of them on the bench, I'll sit down, trim them all, paint them all, and list them on my Etsy shop. So it's the side thing that goes on pretty much constantly in between all of the more interesting, bigger projects.
Everybody needs to go out, run to your Etsy shop and buy the attack gnomes.
Well, they're actually horribly out of stock. Usually the way it works is every time I get a batch of them painted up and ready to go, the first thing that happens is they sell out in 2 minutes, and I get 30 emails from people saying, when do you have more?
I bet they do. Those are awesome.
Yeah,
did you study sculpting? I mean, how did you know how to sculpt?
No, I started with a lump of clay and took apart the parts I don't want, and added the parts I needed, and had a gnome.
You were saying your dad loved to play. What was that all about? We know that the truth is out. Okay. You were saying that your dad worked with his hands. He worked on cars.
He's an auto mechanic by trade.
Yeah. So you must have inherited some of that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
manual
it's fun because most of the time he spent when I was growing up saying, learn how to do something else, go to school, get yourself a job where you can sit in an office with air conditioning, that sort of thing.
Don't follow in my footsteps.
Yeah, a lot of that. And now I'm working with my hands, spending most
Does he
of my
love
time
what you're
dirty.
doing now?
It's funny because it took the longest time before, like after I quit my day job and started focusing on this stuff, there was a few years where pretty much everyone in my family kept asking, like, so when are you going back out to sea?
When are you going to get
and it wasn't until I started actually getting, real exposure and a lot of people asking for things and, big projects where it finally got to the point where they stopped saying, hey, so you're going to get a job again?
Now they know. Yeah. How many, do you ever throw anything out? It looks like you've got everything you ever made in there.
No, it's not even close to everything I've ever made. Yeah. And
what is that, a giant tongue? What are you?
Geez, what is this one? This is a mold for a project that I started a little bit, a few years ago. It's another Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. So this is the bigger,
like a shoulder
badder.
piece?
That's actually the thigh.
Oh my God.
Holy cow!
Yeah. So this suit, by the time it's fully rigged, little Charlotte that's in my TIE Pilot today, I've been doing all the test fitting with her wearing it. And
wait a minute, how tall is she going to be?
She's about 5'2" without it, and fully rigged in the suit. She's a little bit over 8 foot tall.
Oh, okay. I bet you can't wait to get in that, Charlotte. Talk about revenge.
How many drafts do you have to go through? Because I mean, some of these looks like wonderfully finished items. But for example, take the helmet. That's probably not Master Chief, maybe Linda or Fred.
That's from
one of the other Spartans?
Red versus Blue. This is Agent Washington.
Oh, okay,
Red
Washington.
versus Blue. That's what it is. Sure it is.
So a few years back, we were getting ready for Halloween. It's a big group of friends, and we were all talking about what do we do for next year. And a friend of mine, his wife suggested we do the characters from Red versus Blue. The idea being, once you've made one, you pull a mold, you just make as many
Paint it a
copies as you
different
want,
color.
paint them different colors, you've got the whole cast.
Yeah.
So this is, the first time around we made, I think it was 8 or 10 of them we all had walking around together downtown here for Halloween. But this guy here is essentially version 2. Finally got to where I destroyed the original mold, just used it up.
Right. Can you see out of this?
You can, yeah. It's it's mirror tint, just like.
May I put it on?
It's fine with me. It's blow the cobwebs out, I guess.
My ears are too big.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, it's aside from a couple of cosmetic changes, it's essentially exactly the same as the first one.
Oh, this is great.
I noticed some.
All right. You can see out of it.
You can see out of it.
Yeah.
This is actually. Can you do an entire show like that, Leo?
Sure. I love this. I think I'm going to have to because I don't think it's coming off.
I wish you'd have warned me. I could have brought the rest of the armor.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, I don't think it's coming off. Well, anyway.
Is there a big project you want to work on?
The Michael Keaton Batmobile from 1989.
That's not going to fit in your workshop.
I don't need it to fit in my workshop. It'll become my daily driver so I can go for groceries and so on. I'm not worried about fitting it in the workshop.
That's amazing.
I love this.
There's always tons of little weird things. Like I've got a bucket list stack of things that are written up on the wall.
Has Hollywood come to call?
I've done a few pieces for films. The way I usually explain it to people is, when I've done stuff for movies, it's either, really big things for little movies that you probably never see, or it's really little things for big movies that you might never notice. Out
Like
of all of those,
Ghostbusters,
yeah,
right?
Last year's Ghostbusters movie, when that came out, they needed a hood ornament for the new Ecto-1 car. So a friend of mine was actually concept artist for the film, and when they were talking about it at the last minute, like, hey, we should have done this, he says, you know, I know a guy that can pull that together.
Wow.
And so I get an early morning phone call saying, hey, can you give us a hood ornament in about a week? He did the design. You know, he sent me the 3D model, and I basically did all the fabrication, chromed it, and got them sent out to him with about a week's notice.
You're an artist. You're an artist, man. This is my favorite.
Yeah.
Don't you love how
The
this looks?
distressing on that is absolutely
It's amazing.
perfect.
So this one here was actually a reject casting out of the mold, but everything in Fallout is some sort of worn out and beat up and whatever.
Yeah,
so
it's perfect.
In this
It's
case,
rusty and
there was a big nasty blob where there was a bubble in the resin on one side, so I just kind of knocked the bubble off and made it a little bit more messed
looks
up.
right.
So if you look really close, there's like a bullet ding right here. I put another one up here just so that it looks even more, you know, used. And then, you know, rusted the heck out of it. You know,
How do you rust it? Do you spray it?
So in this case, I started with a black wash to kind of take down. Originally, it was a bright silver metallic color, and after the black wash, it got a rust wash in a couple of different shades that were like burnt sienna and raw umber and that sort of thing. And then the last thing was to put dabs of glue where I wanted the really heavy scale rust, and that was dusted over with cinnamon.
That's so
it was actually
cool.
Cinnamon? I thought it smelled rather good.
My guy Freddie, that was actually his idea for let's pack on some more rust, and
it's the best tasting rust ever.
Well, you spend enough time with your shop smelling like like paint and fiberglass fumes and everything else. It's nice for the one day where it becomes
not edible, Leo.
Cinnamon day in the
not
shop.
edible.
It's not edible.
Well, it was actually one of these. I was asking him. I was like, "You really figure this is going to work?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I don't want to pull this thing out of a box in a year and find out it's turned sour. Like, I'm not using food products as finish." And he did some research. Turns out they use cinnamon as a preservative.
This is how makers do the cinnamon challenge.
Yeah, it's the way.
This is so fantastic.
All of it.
I want to thank your models for doing. Look at that. Look at that. What is that? Wow.
So that's another old build. We did Space Marine again from a tabletop war game called Warhammer 40,000.
Oh yes.
So this is the
But the problem with Warhammer, they're about 2 inches tall. These are big, full-sized,
yeah,
amazing.
scaling is entertaining. In that case, that was a sort of digital build. So I started off with the same models that were used to render the characters in a first-player shooter called Space Marine, and then those models were fed into a program called Pepakura that'll actually take like an OBJ file and unfold it and lay it all flat so that you can print it out on your inkjet printer. Then you take all those pieces, print it on cardstock, cut them out, and they're all tabbed and numbered so you can fold it all back together and make an actual physical object.
Shawn, you have found.
Oh, I didn't invent the thing.
No, you have found your place in the
Yes.
world. You're a natural. This is amazing. You taught
Go forth and make.
Just incredible. And look at this, Ironman. And what's the name of the TIE fighter pilot?
That's it, TIE fighter pilot.
TIE fighter pilot.
And Razorhead.
And
the Schick Hydrobot.
The Schick Hydrobot, which is, by the way,
Hydrobot.
there's more in progress because you're going to have them all over the country. There'll be Hydrobots
all over the
everywhere.
world. Yeah, they're gonna. So there's the one that I made last year that's made I don't know, at least.
Are you
half a
working
dozen
on the head
appearances.
so it's not so uncomfortable?
Oh, he'll be fine.
I am so impressed, really so impressed with your art. And it is art. I mean, this really is fantastic.
I can't take much in the way of credit for the design, but the actual fabrication and finish, that's us.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Hollywood's going to continue to come calling. We're going to be seeing your works all over the place. Shawn, it's really nice to meet you. Shawn Thorsson, Thorsson Associates Workshop. And there it is, protagonistforhire.blogspot.com if you want to see more about how he does it. And what's the name of your Etsy shop? I know you don't have any gnomes right now.
It's Thorsoli, Thorsoli.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thorsoli. Okay. And do you expect to make more of those gnomes?
It happens, yeah. Yeah, every time I sit down and I've got nothing going for a minute, I make another dozen or so. And
As we all do.
Just crank out some gnomes, will you? Yeah. Very nice, Shawn. I really appreciate you bringing everything in. Very, very nice to meet you. And thank you again to your fabulous models who've been wearing these for way, way too long. But they really look good. I mean, there's really... Is it kind of fun to be Iron Man and just kind of... Like, nobody wants to mess with you, right? Iron Woman, Schick Hydro, TIE Fighter pilot. You all look great. Thank you. Thank you, Shawn Thorsson.